Hello and welcome to Piwik PRO YouTube video series. Topic of the video: exporting data from CDP to Google Sheets using Zapier. So what we're going to learn? First, we're going to talk about some use cases, and CDP has some interesting ones, I have to say. This does not have to be your usual export here and import their data transfer, so stay tuned. But then we're going to go through the step-by-step process of setting up the data export from CDP to Google Sheets using Zapier. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video on the data import to CDP, please have a look, especially if you want to hear my short introduction to Zapier and how it works, and some complementary use cases to the ones we're going to be covering today. I also talk about Google Sheets a bit. Anyway, I'll add the link in the description and at the end of this video. So, what would be some example use cases? First, it could be a simple data export, since CDP could be your one place for all your important data on your customers, prospects, users. You may want to select few or many different user attributes and export them to Google Spreadsheet. That is quite straightforward. But why did I call it real-time exports? Because the key thing here is that each user's data will be sent one by one upon the met conditions of the audience, which could be something as simple as user email is not empty and say child status is true as opposed to be false. Obviously, this could be much more sophisticated audience than the one that I proposed, but then the data that we send to spreadsheet is whatever we want, and obviously is available in CDP, which might include website traffic data as well as any other data that we feed into the CDP. Here, the attributes are only lead score and region, but they could include many more and many different attributes if we wish. The second example that I want to bring to your attention is quite unique for our CDP because of the way you can build your audiences in Piwik PRO CDP. Namely, you can create an audience based on conditions, but rather than using attribute conditions, you could use behavioral conditions like the behavior frequency and recency. So based on engagement on your website or app. And the best part about it is that you may want to decide to send just emails or some other contact data like phone number, because the conditions of the audience are narrowing the purpose of that spreadsheet user list. So let's use simple but a concrete example. Say audience of users who went to particular content category 3 times in the last 2 days. And again, the key here is that the conditions are based on interactions frequency and recency. So you could create a list of users or prospects that you want to get in touch with based on that very behavior. And then their email will be sent to spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet could be used as a list of contacts that you need to get in touch with. Another example could be, let's say you've got a new feature in your online platform, online product, and you want a list of users who interacted with that new feature of yours. And this could be whether by visiting that particular section of your platform or by clicking on a certain element. You can define it then the frequency and recency of interactions with that very new feature, and the number and the recency of those interactions could indicate the level of interest. And then you could use that list of users who interacted recently with that new feature as a list of users who you would want to get in touch with for the early feedback on that new feature. So that way the improvement process could be quite quick, and you can get to the users who are actually using it and interacting with it. Okay, now let's get to the step-by-step instructions for data export from CDP to Google Sheets. First, we need to create an audience, but just to let you know, I have already my Zapier account open. I have my spreadsheet with simple columns, user, country, device. This is the kind of data that we're going to export. There can be more, there can be less, meaning just one column. If we just want a list of users that meet certain audience conditions, it's up to us. I just want to keep things simple, and I've limited it to 3 columns. But the very first step that we need to perform is to create the audience. So let's do that. And in many cases, we would want to have some sort of identifier that we would be using across different platforms or systems. So that could be email or some sort of customer ID login. In CDP, we use attribute user ID that stores that data. You can use first, last value, any value. So I'm going to use any value, but if you were to get the most recent one, you get the last value. That depends on your use case. I'm going to use any, and any user ID is not empty, meaning we do have a value. So if we were to have an email, the value of the email for a particular user is not empty, because if we were to use identifier just on the website, that would be a cookie ID. But if we want to use the identifier across different systems, this has to be something that is common for those systems. And in our case, on our website, that's an email. So that's the very first condition. And then you can, on top of that, you would add some other conditions. I'm going to use something rather simple. So blog category. So if you were to go to the website, each and every blog post has a category, and that category is finances. And if somebody went to the blog post category at least 2 times, obviously we can increase that number in the last, let's say, an hour, or we could use, let's say, 7 days. Every 7 days we would check that list in a spreadsheet and perhaps get in touch with those users who are interested in category finances. That's just the example. And every 7 days we would clear that list and then start over. So simple audience. Now all we've got left is to provide it a name, data export to Google Sheets, and let's save it. So that's our very first step. Okay, second step will be to create activation. So let's go to activations. The activation, we're going to have to create Zapier and activation at the same time. But first, let's create an activation. So let's add an activation. Let's select Zapier template. Let's hit next. Activation data export to Google Sheets. So that's the name of our activation. And first we need to select what sort of users we want to send to Google Sheets, what sort of users data we want to send to spreadsheet. And obviously those will be the users of the audience that we've just created. So data export to Google Sheets, that was the audience that we just created. And in here, in just a moment, we're going to copy and paste a webhook. So first we're going to have to create a webhook in Zapier. We're going to do that in a moment. But before we do that, we need to decide what sort of data we want to send to Google spreadsheet. And the good clue is are the headings of our spreadsheet. So user, country, and device type. So user, the key will be in our activation user identifier. Value will be user ID. So that's column A. Second will be country. And in here, we need to select country. And we're going to select last value, so the most recent, and it's the same for the user ID. The country value is being taken or automatically tracked while we track our website or an app, and so now we're just basically pairing those key values with each other. And third will be the device type, which is a column C. So important part is not to use any spaces while we naming our keys in the activation. So I did, and I created the underscore, which I would recommend using those. And in here, we need to pair it with device type. And again, let's use last. Let's close that. And now I can't send any test data because there's nowhere to be sent. So now we need to have a webhook. But in order to have a webhook, we need to go to Zapier. So that's like the second part of our step 2, which is to create a Zap. So let's create a Zap. If you're not familiar with the Zapier, there's another video that I've linked in the description where I explain how Zapier works just at the very top level overview, which might be useful if you haven't used it before. Anyway, the very first step is to create a trigger, and that will be a webhook trigger. So we've created our webhook trigger, and here we're gonna select catch hook and gonna hit continue. We're gonna leave it as it is. And now Zapier have created a webhook URL. We're gonna copy that webhook. So I've done that, and I'm gonna paste it here, right? Now notice that I can send the data. It's not grayed out. I'm not gonna save it just yet, but now we need to go to Zapier, and I'm gonna test the trigger. But to test the trigger, I need to send the test data. So let's send test data, and now let's test the trigger. And now we can see here request A. If we didn't send the test data, Zapier wouldn't return anything here. But because we did, now I can click on that and I can see what sort of data is being sent. So user identifier, country, and device type. Those are the values that we used here. Okay, so we've got that part. Now we can continue with the selected records. And now we need to create the activation in Zapier, which will be Google Sheets. Now it's Google Sheets, so it's already selected. Action event, we need to select the action event. And in our case, that will be create a spreadsheet row, which means that we're going to create every time when a user joins the audience in CDP, that user will have its own row record in our spreadsheet. But that's not everything. We need to hit continue. And in here, we need to select Drive, which is my Google Drive in my case, spreadsheet. In my case, that's a CDP spreadsheet, worksheet. And in here, I have 3 worksheets, but this one has a name CDP import. So I need to select CDP import. And now in here, in this CDP import, we have 3 headings: user, country, and device type. So we need to select what sort of values from CDP we want to send under user column, country column, and device column. So I'm going to hit on plus. So under user, I'm going to use user identifier. Under country, I'm going to use country. And under device type, I'm going to use device type. And I'm going to hit continue. We can now test the step. So this is the kind of data that will be sent. We don't have anything here just yet. But after test step, we're going to send test, test, and 0 under each particular column. Okay. We can see that the test went as intended, so all in order. And now let's just give our Zap a name. So data export from CDP to Google Sheets, and let's publish the Zap. The Zap was published. We can save the activation. And if we were to go to the audience, here we're going to go to the website and we're going to basically try to meet the condition. So we need to log in as a user onto the website, and we have to go to the blog post category called finances 2 times to basically meet the criteria of the audience. So the profile will be added to the audience, and as a result will be activated. So the data will be sent to a spreadsheet. So let's do that. So I'm now on the website, which is linked to the CDP. First, let's consent to data tracking. And now to meet the criteria of the very first condition, meaning user ID is not empty, I need to register. So I need to go to login and then register. So my email is being captured. So let's say that's my username. That's my email. And that should be enough to register. Okay, so I'm logged in, meaning my user email is no longer empty. And now I need to go to a blog post that of category finances. So this one has a category finance. In fact, if I were to click on that, in here I can see that it's finances. I need to go to the blog post of this blog post category finances twice. So I can either refresh the page, or I could go to another blog post. So let's do that with the same type of category, finances. So let's do that. Okay, that's done. I may now go back to the CDP and check if my profile was added to the audience. So I'm in the CDP now. And what I need to do, at the moment we see 0 profiles, but if I click on refresh data, that should add a new profile. I can see that the profile is here, and if I click on that, that's my profile. Since we have the first profile, the second thing that we could check is to go to the activations and see if the activation took place correctly. So we can see successful data activation. We've got 1, we've got it, we can see it on the chart. We also see here that it's a correct profile, so it's all as intended. And finally, we can check in a spreadsheet if the data went through correctly, and we can see it did. So we can see my email, we can see the country, and the device type. So all seems fine. However, if something doesn't work as expected, these steps going through audience activations and all that can help us pinpoint where an issue may have occurred and identify any mistakes you may have made during the steps, each individual step. But to go over the process once again, let's summarize it. So we've created the audience, which helps us identify whose data we want to send. And here we can be very specific, meaning we can define the the number of events. This could be one event or multiple different events. We can specify attributes, so we can be very specific, or we can be less specific and say we could potentially just add any user ID is not empty, and that's it. So we can be quite broad in our condition. A lot of users data would have been sent to spreadsheet. Second step, we decided once we know what sort of whose data we want to send in the audience, in the activation in here, we decided what sort of data is going to be sent. And then the entire process was facilitated by the use of Zapier to then send data to Google Spreadsheet. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to our channel. Check the description below to find some useful links like free Piwik PRO sign-up page, community forum page, and links to related videos. Until next time.